Okay, so skin cancer. It's it's a bit of a heavy topic, but it's something we got to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think most people probably know that it's the most common cancer in the United States.
It is.
But did you know that millions of people are diagnosed with it every single year?
Yeah, it's a huge number.
It is a huge number. And it's costing, well, treating it costs us like billions of dollars every year, like something around 8.9 billion annually. It's wild.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. It really shows you just how widespread this problem is.
Exactly. But today, we're not just going to throw a bunch of statistics at you. We want to actually really get into the why. Why is skin cancer so widespread? And we've got some fascinating new research that looks at way more than just, having fair skin or spending too much time in the sun.
Absolutely. We're kind of going beyond those usual suspects that we always hear about when it comes to skin cancer risk. This deep dive is we're taking a different route.
Oh.
Looking at how our lives, like our social situations, could be playing a much bigger role than we realize. We're breaking down this really cool study from Florida Atlantic University, and they're exploring these things called social determinants of health.
And they're linked to getting sunburn and how we protect ourselves.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. We've been going through this study, and honestly, it's one of those things that just makes you kind of rethink some things.
Yeah.
And our goal today is to kind of connect some dots that don't seem very connected and just reveal some of these unexpected things that might influence who gets sunburned and then ultimately, who's at a higher risk for skin cancer. So
yeah,
get ready for some aha moments. Yeah. You'll definitely have a few of those, I think. But first, I think it would be good to back up for a second and get a better sense of the scale of the problem. Like you said, skin cancer is insanely common. Millions of new cases every year in the U.S. alone. And although non-melanoma types are the most common, we can't forget that tens of thousands of people are diagnosed with melanoma every year, which is a lot more serious, obviously. And that $8.9 billion price tag for treatment really underlines how big of an issue this is.
It does. And, just to touch on what we think we know, we've always heard, okay, fair skin, if you spend a lot of time in the sun or using tanning beds, family history, all these things, these are all definitely factors. But this new research, it really takes a different angle. They wanted to see if there were bigger societal patterns that were influencing these risks.
Yeah, I think what's really cool about this Florida Atlantic University study is that it's actually one of very few that actually examines the relationship between reported sunburns, like people who say, yeah, I got sunburned, and these much broader societal factors. And they didn't just ask about, getting burned. They also wanted to know who was using sunscreen and who isn't. So to do this, they used this data from the U.S. National Cancer Institute. It's their 2022 Health Information National Trends Survey 6. It's got a catchy name. It's called Hints 6.
Hint 6. Okay, got it. So what kind of questions did they ask in this Hint 6 that helped them see these deeper connections?
Well, they looked at a few things, like how confident people felt about taking care of their own health in general, what people thought about their risk of getting skin cancer, how much they worried about a diagnosis, and then super important for us, how many sunburns they got in the last year. And then they took all that and look at how these answers related to things like their age, gender, job, relationship status, education level, ethnicity, and income level.
Okay, and what did they learn about how confident people were in taking care of their health, and then how concerned they were about skin cancer?
That's really interesting. So they surveyed over 6,000 people, and out of all those people, the majority of them felt pretty confident in their ability to take care of their health in general, which is good.
Yeah.
But when it came to skin cancer, the level of concern was a bit more moderate. Only about 9% of those people said that they were extremely worried about skin cancer.
That's kind of surprising. It is the most common cancer. You'd think that more people would be really concerned about it.
Right, you would think so.
But
yeah, so then the next step is, okay, well, let's see who is actually getting sunburned. And that's where things get a little more interesting. About 67% said they hadn't gotten a sunburn in the past year, which sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But then almost a third, like 30.3%, said they had gotten between 1 and 5 sunburns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty big jump. And then there's this smaller group, about 6%, who said they even, drank alcohol while they had a sunburn.
Ooh.
Which is definitely not going to make things better.
No, it's not going to help.
But yeah, actually, things like having a few drinks, working outside, going swimming, these were all pretty common among the people who did get sunburned.
Which makes sense, right? But we can't forget that even just a few bad sunburns can really have a big impact later on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I feel like there's a stat about childhood sunburns.
Oh, yeah. There's a pretty alarming statistic from the American Academy of Dermatology. And they say that if you get 5 or more blistering sunburns between the ages of 15 and 20, your chances of getting melanoma, which is the really serious type of skin cancer, go up by like 80%.
That's a lot.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And the chance of getting non-melanoma skin cancer goes up by 68%.
Oh, my gosh. So, yeah, those early sunburns, they can really have some consequences later in life.
Yeah, they can definitely come back to bite you.
Yeah. So we have a better idea now of who is getting sunburn, but let's get into the part that I found the most interesting. How those sunburns relate to the social factors we talked about.
Yeah.
What were some of the most interesting things that they found?
Yeah, well, there were some really fascinating patterns that emerged. Like, they found that adults over 40 were less likely to report a sunburn compared to, like, younger people. And then also gender played a role. So women tended to have fewer sunburns than men.
Okay, those kind of make sense to me. Maybe older people are more aware of the risks, and maybe women are just like better about protecting themselves from the sun.
Yeah, maybe.
But what else did they find?
Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit more complex. So when they looked at employment status, they found that people who were disabled, unemployed, or had multiple jobs actually reported fewer sunburns. And then marital status had a pretty surprising connection. So people who are married or in a relationship had a higher risk of getting a sunburn compared to people who were divorced or single.
Okay, now those are the kind of findings that make you go, I wonder what's going on there. Like, why would being married or having more than one job make you more likely to get sunburn?
Right.
Maybe it has something to do with how you spend your time. If you have more than one job, maybe you're working outside more.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And this study doesn't really give us specific answers about the why, but it definitely suggests that, like, lifestyle things are probably involved.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe married couples, they do more leisure activities outside together or something. Or like you said, people with multiple jobs, maybe those jobs involve more time in the sun. It raises some really interesting questions.
It really does. What about education level and race and ethnicity? Did they find anything interesting about those factors?
Yeah, they did. So they found that higher levels of education were connected to a lower risk of sunburns.
Okay.
And then when they looked at race and ethnicity, they found that people who identified as Hispanic, Black, Asian, or mixed race had a lower risk of sunburn compared to white people.
Okay, that seems to fit with, like, if you have more melanin in your skin, you're probably a little more protected naturally. But I know this study also talked about some, like, nuances within those groups, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this is where I think a quote from Dr. Leah Saka, who is the lead author of the study, really helps to give us the bigger picture. So she said that while these social things that we've been talking about, like your race, your gender, income, employment, are definitely linked to sunburn and skin cancer risk, it's not always a super straightforward relationship.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, Hispanic and Black individuals tend to report fewer sunburns, but Hispanic people might perceive more benefits from being out in the sun, which ironically could increase their risk overall if they're not careful.
Right.
It's like how you think about the sun within these groups is super important.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. And then Dr. Saka also pointed out that things like gender, education, and income level can impact how people use sunscreen. And this can vary within racial and ethnic groups.
So they saw that sunscreen use was generally lower among Black and Hispanic Americans, but then women in those groups who had higher education and income were more likely to use sunscreen.
Right, so access to information and just better resources in general probably plays a role there.
Yeah, most likely.
But let's go back to maybe the most surprising finding for me, which is the link between income and sunburn. What was going on there?
Yeah, so this was definitely unexpected. The study found that higher income groups actually had a significantly higher risk of sunburn.
Really?
Yeah. So the people in the highest income group were over 4 times more likely to report a sunburn compared to those in the lowest income group.
Wow. 4 times. That really goes against what you'd probably think, you know?
It does.
Like, you'd think more money would mean more access to better sunscreen, maybe more shade and just better awareness of the risks, right?
Exactly. But the study, it doesn't give us the exact reason why, but it does suggest that higher income could be related to lifestyle choices that just involve a lot more time out in the sun.
Right, yeah.
So think about it.
You're more likely to travel, maybe go on vacations to sunny places. You might play golf, go boating, or you might have a job that involves being outside a lot and pays well. It's a really fascinating thing to look into in more detail in the future. Like, what are the exact mechanisms happening there?
It is. It really is. It shows that, sun safety it's a lot more complicated than we might think.
Yeah.
And just to bring it back to why it's so important to understand these risks, can we talk a little bit about the different types of skin cancer?
Yeah, of course. So, as the report points out, the three main types are basal cell carcinoma, which is the most common but typically least aggressive type.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's squamous cell carcinoma. And this one can spread to other parts of the body if it's not treated.
Oh, okay.
And then finally, there's melanoma. And this is the one that we really need to watch out for because it can spread quickly.
Right.
So knowing who is most likely to get sunburns is a really key part of preventing all these types of skin cancer. It is. And Madison Etzel, who was the first author on this study, she had a really good point about why it's so important to understand how people view these risks and how they protect themselves.
Oh, yeah, she did. She stressed how important it is to understand how different groups perceive their risk and the actions they take to protect themselves, especially for groups that this study found were more likely to be at risk. The fact that all of those social factors that we talked about, all of them were significantly linked to the number of sunburns people reported, just really highlights how we need to come up with better ways to educate people about sun safety. And those ways need to be tailored for different groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. So taking everything we've talked about into account, what are the general recommendations for staying safe in the sun? What do organizations like the American Cancer Society say?
Well, the basic advice is still super important. So you want to make sure you're using a sunscreen that's broad spectrum and has an SPF of 30 or higher, especially when you're going to be outside. And reapply it every 2 hours. It's really important.
Oh, okay. I need to be better about that.
Yeah. And then also avoiding direct sunlight during those peak hours,
Right.
from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's when the sun is the strongest. And finding some shade whenever you can is really helpful, too. Another important thing is wearing protective clothing, like long sleeves, a hat with a wide brim, and sunglasses that block UVA and UVB rays. Those are all extra layers of protection. And then, of course, no tanning beds. Definitely avoid those.
Yeah, good advice. And beyond trying to prevent sunburn in the first place, early detection is also really important, right?
Yes, it's crucial. Checking your own skin for any new moles or spots or anything that looks different or is changing, and then seeing a dermatologist for regular skin checks. Those things can really increase your chances of catching skin cancer early when it's the easiest to treat.
That's good to know. Are there any other tips for staying safe in the sun that people might not think about very often?
Yeah. So it's good to keep in mind that things like water, sand, and snow can actually reflect UV rays. So you'll probably need to reapply your sunscreen more often when you're around those things.
Oh, okay.
And then just staying hydrated is good for your skin in general. And it can help it deal with being out in the sun.
Good advice. Okay, so we've talked about a lot. We started with the fact that skin cancer is a big problem in the U.S., and then we went into that really cool study that revealed all these interesting social factors that can affect your risk.
Right. And the main takeaway for you, the listener, is that getting sunburned, and by extension, your risk for skin cancer, isn't just about what you do to protect yourself from the sun. It's way more complicated than that. It's connected to so many other things in our lives, like how much money we make, our relationships, the jobs we have, and even our education. And the fact that higher income seems to be linked to more sunburns, that was a real shocker for me.
Yeah, it's not what you expect.
No, definitely not. And it really makes you think about the reasons behind it.
It really does. It makes you think about sun safety in a new way.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you to think about. Given all these connections we've talked about, what kind of bigger changes in society, or even more specifically, what kind of awareness campaigns could we create to really bring those skin cancer rates down for everyone? It's clearly about a lot more than just telling people to wear sunscreen.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big question. And it forces us to think beyond just individual behaviors and look at those bigger social and economic forces that can affect our health. Maybe it means making sure everyone can get good sun protection no matter where they live, or coming up with educational messages that actually resonate with different lifestyles and how people perceive risk.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to think about for yourself and for your community as we all work towards better skin health.
Absolutely. So that's it for this deep dive into the surprising social factors that could be putting you at risk for skin cancer. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a great discussion.